Mandela Effect, a phrase that sounds like a riddle, like something whispered from the edge of memory itself. You've heard it before, perhaps, in a casual conversation, or buried inside an internet thread that made you question your own past. It begins simply, a memory you're certain of, one you'd bet your name upon. A line from a childhood film, the spelling of a logo, the death of a public figure. You remember it so clearly, as if it were carved into the folds of your mind. And yet, when you return to check, the world disagrees. The film never said that line. The logo was never spelled that way. That person never died, at least not when you thought they did. It's like waking up to find a room rearranged while you were asleep. The furniture subtly shifted, the shadows slightly different, but no one admits to moving them. The Mandela Effect is not just about mistakes of memory. No, it's something deeper, stranger. It's the collective experience of remembering a reality that never was. Not just you, not just me, but thousands, sometimes millions of people remembering the same false truth, as though our minds were tuned to a frequency from another world, one that slipped away before we could hold on. Why does it happen? Some say it is merely the frailty of memory, the mind stitching illusions with invisible thread. Others whisper of parallel universes brushing against each other, realities colliding like waves on a cosmic shore. They imagine timelines splitting and bending, each one slightly different, until fragments leak across the divide. A phrase here, a death there, a logo that never quite existed, but somehow feels as familiar as your own reflection. As you listen tonight, I invite you to let go of certainty. Memory is a strange companion. It comforts us, it defines us, but it also deceives us. The Mandela Effect asks us to peer into the cracks of our recollections and wonder, how much of what we know is truly ours, and how much is a ghost of another possible world? This is not just a story of forgotten facts. It is a meditation on the architecture of memory, on the dreamlike nature of time, on the haunting possibility that reality is less fixed than we believe. Tonight, we'll journey into that fog, where truth and illusion entwine, where déjà vu becomes an ocean, and where the line between the world we inhabit and the one we remember begins to blur. So close your eyes, if you wish. Let the weight of the day dissolve into the background hum, and together, let's wander into the labyrinth of shared false memories, into the strange, quiet mystery we call the Mandela Effect. It begins, as so many mysteries do, with a whisper, quiet, almost forgettable. A faint thread woven into the digital chatter of the early internet. A group of people, scattered across continents, began speaking of a memory they shared with complete conviction, that Nelson Mandela, the revolutionary leader and eventual president of South Africa, had died in prison during the 1980s. They remembered the newscasts, the sorrow, the speeches of mourning. They remembered his funeral. They remembered a history that, according to the world they now stood in, had never happened. Mandela, alive and well, was released from prison in 1990 and went on to serve as president until 1999. He lived long enough to pass away publicly in 2013, and yet, for countless people, that was not the timeline they had carried inside themselves. They insisted, passionately, that they had seen his death decades earlier. Their voices trembled with certainty, as if reality itself had betrayed them. The whispers multiplied. What began as a single strange dissonance of memory spread outward, like ripples across a lake. People started to ask, if we could be wrong about Mandela, what else could we be wrong about? And so they looked deeper, and they began to notice. The misremembered quotes from movies, Darth Vader's line not being, "Luke, I am your father," but "No, I am your father." The Berenstain Bears spelled with an stain, not the more familiar Stein. The Monopoly Man, no monocle. Curious George, no tail. Whole pieces of memory, clear and vivid, now unmoored from truth. It was as though a secret door had opened, revealing that memory itself might not be a solid floor beneath us, but a shifting fog reassembling with every breath. People who had once trusted their recollections implicitly now began to doubt. They asked one another, if our minds can lie so convincingly, how much of the world is built on these illusions? The internet, with its endless archives and communities, gave the Mandela Effect a home. Forums lit up with stories, threads grew thick with debates. One person would declare, "I swear it was this way," and another would echo, "Yes, I remember the same." The eerie thing was not that people disagreed. It was that so many people remembered the same false version together. This was no longer about individual lapses. This was about a phenomenon, collective and undeniable in its scale. The first whispers of the Mandela Effect turned into a chorus, one that questioned not only memory, but the very nature of reality. Was this mass confusion merely the echo of fragile minds? Or had we stumbled upon the edge of something greater? Timelines overlapping, universes folding, histories rearranged in ways too subtle to notice until someone dared to look closely. The first whispers of the Mandela Effect were not dismissed. They were absorbed, amplified, and transformed into a cultural riddle. And it was in this riddle that the seed of the phenomenon took root, waiting to grow into the tangled forest of questions we still wander through today. When the first whispers of the Mandela Effect drifted into the digital world, they were like sparks landing on dry grass. At first, small, uncertain flickers of confusion, but the internet has a way of magnifying strangeness, of collecting scattered whispers into a single, undeniable chorus. And so it was here, within the glow of screens and the endless scroll of forums, that the Mandela Effect took its first breath of fire. In the early days, the stories lived in quiet corners of the web, threads tucked away in discussion boards, scattered blogs and chat rooms where people admitted, almost sheepishly, "Does anyone else remember this differently?" The question itself was simple, but the answers were haunting. Because time and again, others would respond, not with correction or dismissal, but with an echo. "Yes, I remember it too." It wasn't just one person misremembering a detail. It was thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, insisting that they shared the same exact false memory. And the internet, which thrives on patterns, began weaving these fragments together into something larger. Someone would mention a cartoon character with a detail that never existed, and suddenly dozens would confirm it. Another would recall a book title spelled a certain way, and an entire community would rise to say, "Exactly, that's how I saw it too." The web became a mirror hall of memory, each reflection bouncing back with slight distortions, each echo amplifying the idea that something much stranger than ordinary forgetfulness was at work. Forums lit up with threads asking, "Are we shifting timelines? Are we sliding between parallel worlds? Has our history been rewritten while we weren't looking?" What made the Mandela Effect so magnetic online wasn't only the memories themselves, but the emotional charge behind them. People weren't casually misremembering. They were shaken, even unsettled, by how strongly they felt about their recollections. They described the memories with detail and confidence. Where they were, who they were with, even the emotional context of the moment. It felt lived in, real, permanent, and yet the world said otherwise. That tension, between what the heart knew and what the facts declared, was what fueled the wildfire. The internet became the crucible of the phenomenon because it did what the human mind could not do alone. It gathered thousands of experiences and placed them side by side. And once the volume of stories grew too great, the Mandela Effect transformed from a curious trick of memory into a cultural mystery. It was no longer, "Did I misremember this?" It was, "Why are so many of us remembering the same wrong thing together?" And within that question lay something even deeper. The dawning suspicion that memory is not an individual illusion, but a shared dream. That perhaps reality itself is something woven from the consensus of billions of minds. And when enough of us remember differently, the dream shifts, and cracks appear in the fabric of what we call truth. The internet didn't just awaken the Mandela Effect, it gave it permanence. It gave it evidence, threads, archives. It gave it a stage on which millions could participate. And in doing so, it transformed a whisper into a movement, one that would spread across the globe and haunt the collective imagination. At first, the Mandela Effect was a curiosity, a strange trick of the mind that floated between internet threads and late-night conversations. But like all mysteries that tap into something universal, it began to spread. What was once niche and hidden became mainstream, a cultural phenomenon that entered living rooms, classrooms, even scientific debates. It started with the small stories. A movie line remembered differently, a childhood book cover that seemed to shift its spelling, the detail of a cereal box logo. These were harmless, even amusing at first. People laughed about them, the way you might laugh at a dream you can't explain. "Isn't it funny," they'd say, "how so many of us got it wrong?" But beneath the laughter, something else was stirring, a subtle unease. Because when memory fails, it is supposed to fail alone. One person misremembers a detail, another corrects it, and the world moves on. Yet here, entire groups were carrying the same false image, the same phantom recollection. That was different. That was unsettling. As stories multiplied, media outlets began to take notice. Articles were written, television segments aired, and suddenly, the Mandela Effect had a name. One that carried with it an aura of mystery, a kind of linguistic spell. To say Mandela Effect was to invoke not just a failure of memory, but the possibility of entire alternate realities brushing against our own. Pop culture absorbed it like a sponge. Late-night hosts made jokes, documentaries explored it, podcasts dedicated episodes to unraveling its mysteries. Social media amplified the phenomenon further, turning it into shareable content. Quizzes asking, "Which version do you remember?" Memes that highlighted the strangest examples. YouTube videos diving into theories of parallel universes and timeline shifts. The Mandela Effect became not just an internet mystery, but a piece of cultural fabric. A phrase almost everyone had heard, whether or not they believed in it. And with cultural recognition came a deeper shift. For some, the Mandela Effect was simply entertainment, a quirky brain glitch that made for good conversation. But for others, it was something much heavier. It became proof. Proof that reality was not what it seemed. Proof that the universe was stranger, slipperier than the textbooks told us. Proof that perhaps we were living in a simulation, or drifting between branching timelines, or being quietly rewritten by forces we could not see. In this way, the Mandela Effect crossed a threshold. It was no longer just about memory. It became about trust. Could we trust our minds? Could we trust history? Could we trust the consensus of reality itself? The answers were elusive, and in that uncertainty, the phenomenon gained even more power. People began to collect examples like relics, cataloging every false memory they could find. Websites sprang up dedicated to archiving them, ranking them, debating them. The Berenstain Bears, the Monopoly Man's missing monocle, mirror on the wall that was never said in Snow White. Each new discovery added another layer to the puzzle, another reminder that memory and truth were not as tightly bound as we had once believed. And just like that, the Mandela Effect transformed. What began as a whisper of confusion became a roaring cultural mirror, forcing us to confront not only the fragility of human memory, but the fragility of the world we believe memory reflects. It became more than a curiosity. It became a lens, a cultural phenomenon through which we began to question the very foundations of reality itself. Confusion is often a lonely thing. When you forget a name on the tip of your tongue or misremember a detail from a story, you feel a quiet embarrassment, a small fracture in the smooth surface of certainty. Normally, memory slips are private ghosts, small, fragile mistakes that belong only to you. But the Mandela Effect does something different. It takes that lonely confusion and makes it communal. Suddenly, the error is not yours alone to bear. Suddenly, you are surrounded by countless others who swear they remember the same thing you do, in the same way, with the same vividness. And in that shared bewilderment, something unexpected emerges: comfort. Think of it like standing in a dark room, unsure if what you saw in the shadows was real. Your heart pounds, your breath catches, and then, across the room, someone whispers, "I saw it too." Immediately, your fear is softened. You are no longer alone in the dark. The Mandela Effect works the same way. It gives people a sense of validation, even in their confusion. When people began discovering forums filled with others who remembered Mandela dying in prison, or Febreze spelled with 2 E's instead of 1, or Pikachu's tail tipped with black instead of yellow, there was a strange sense of relief. They were not broken. They were not imagining things. Their memory, however flawed, was not a solitary mistake. It was part of something larger, a collective riddle. And in that shared riddle, community began to bloom. Threads of strangers grew into conversations. Conversations grew into friendships. Friendships into whole communities united by the same bizarre experience. The haunting feeling that something was slightly off about the world. For once, confusion was not isolating. It was connecting. In a way, the Mandela Effect provided a new form of belonging. Not belonging to certainty, not belonging to truth, but belonging to mystery. It created a fellowship of the uncertain, a gathering of souls who admitted, "I don't know why, but I remember it differently too." That small admission opened the door to long conversations, endless speculation, even laughter at the absurdity of it all. And there was power in that comfort, because if you are wrong alone, it feels like weakness. But if you are wrong together, it begins to feel like something else, like discovery. Maybe we are not mistaken, people thought. Maybe we are glimpsing something hidden, something the rest of the world refuses to see. The Mandela Effect, then, is not just about the memories themselves. It is about the strange intimacy of confusion shared. It is about millions of people, scattered across the globe, finding each other in the fog and saying, "Yes, I see it too. I thought I was the only one." And in that moment, the loneliness of doubt dissolves. What replaces it is a collective wonder, and sometimes a quiet fear that perhaps the cracks in memory are not cracks at all, but windows. Windows into something larger, stranger, waiting just beyond the veil. Memory is the architecture of the self. It tells us who we are, where we have been, what we love, and what we fear. Without it, our lives are not a story, but a scattering of disconnected moments. And yet, for something so foundational, memory is not carved in stone. It is written in water. It bends, it shifts, it reshapes itself with each passing day. The Mandela Effect forces us to confront this fragility in a way that feels almost painful. We like to imagine memory as a perfect archive, a vault of moments locked safely away. But the truth is more unsettling. Each time we recall a memory, we do not simply retrieve it, we rebuild it. We reconstruct it from fragments, impressions, emotions, and associations. And in the process, the memory is subtly altered, like a painting touched by too many brushes. Recall it often enough, and what you are remembering is not the original moment, but the last time you remembered it. The Mandela Effect amplifies this truth. When thousands of people recall Darth Vader saying, "Luke, I am your father," it feels impossible that so many could be wrong. But memory is not democratic. It does not obey the rule of numbers. It obeys suggestion, context, emotion. A phrase repeated often in jokes, parodies, and pop culture can become more real in the mind than the original line itself. And once it takes root, it grows strong, spreading across minds like ivy. But here's the deeper strangeness. Even when we know our memory is false, the feeling of certainty does not vanish. You can watch the original film, hear the lines spoken correctly, see the truth with your own eyes, and still somewhere inside, a voice insists, "No, that's not right. I remember differently." It is in that clash between the cold fact and the warm conviction that fragility reveals itself most starkly. We are creatures of trust. We trust our senses, we trust our memories, because without them, reality itself unravels. And yet, when memory fails us, when it shows its cracks, the ground beneath us trembles. What else might we be misremembering? How many of our cherished stories, our deepest beliefs, are built not on truth, but on illusions shaped by time and suggestion? Psychologists tell us that memory is malleable, that the brain can be tricked, nudged, even rewritten. Eyewitness testimonies can contradict one another. Entire groups can misremember the same event because of how it was reported, repeated, or reframed. The Mandela Effect, then, may simply be a magnifying glass on this universal vulnerability. An intimate reminder that memory is not fact, but interpretation. And yet, is that all it is? If memory is fragile, if it can bend so easily, why then do so many of us bend in the same direction, toward the same illusions? Is it merely chance? Or is there something deeper, something beneath the surface of consciousness, pulling our recollections into alignment with some hidden, alternate truth? The fragility of memory is both humbling and terrifying. It reminds us that our sense of reality is not as solid as we believe, but it also invites us to look closer, to question, to wonder whether the cracks in memory are not just failures, but doors that open into greater mysteries waiting to be explored. Memory is rarely a solitary thing. We like to imagine our recollections as private treasures, sealed away inside our minds, untouched by the world around us. But the truth is far more intricate. Memory is social. It is a dance between the individual and the collective, shaped as much by stories we are told as by the events we experience. And the Mandela Effect, strange as it is, thrives in that space where private memory collides with public agreement. Psychologists speak of collective memory, the shared recollections of groups, nations, even entire cultures. These memories are not perfect records of the past. They are narratives, agreed upon and reinforced through repetition. Think of how a country remembers its history. how a family tells its stories, how a society recalls its heroes and tragedies. Each memory is filtered, polished, retold until it becomes not just personal truth, but communal identity. In this way, memory is not simply stored inside us, it is negotiated between us. We lean on others to confirm our experiences. We say, "Do you remember when?" And their nod, their echo, becomes the anchor that keeps our memory tethered. When enough people agree, the memory hardens, even if it is built on sand. The Mandela Effect reveals the fragility of this process. When thousands of people share the same false recollection, be it a cartoon character's missing feature, a famous line misquoted, or an event that never occurred, we see the psychology of collective memory laid bare. We discover how easily minds can align, not only in truth, but in illusion. Consider how rumors spread. One person recalls a detail incorrectly, repeats it, and others adopt it as fact. Over time, the error becomes the accepted version. Now multiply that across millions of minds, reinforced by media, repetition, and the comforting rhythm of agreement. Suddenly, what never was begins to feel like what always has been. There is also the matter of suggestion. When someone posts online, "Do you remember Mandela dying in prison in the 1980s?" Those who had a vague, foggy memory may latch onto it, filling in the blanks of their own minds with details they never possessed. The memory feels real, even though it was planted like a seed. The more the seed is watered through conversation, debate, and confirmation, the more it grows into something unshakable. Yet, the strangest part of collective memory is not its malleability, but its conviction. To those who remember differently, the feeling of certainty is absolute. It does not feel like a mistake. It feels like lived reality. It is that conviction that transforms the Mandela Effect from a curiosity into a mystery. Because how can so many people be so certain of something that never happened? Psychology offers its explanations: false memory, misinformation, confabulation. But within the poetry of the human mind, there remains a lingering unease. What if our shared false memories are not merely failures of the brain, but echoes of something else? Another path, another timeline, another version of reality where these memories were true. The psychology of collective memory reminds us of a sobering truth. Our minds are not private vaults of truth, but open fields where stories, suggestions, and agreements take root. And when enough of us water the same illusion, it can grow into a forest so dense, so convincing, that it becomes indistinguishable from the real. The human mind has always been drawn to mysteries too vast to hold. When faced with the unexplainable, we create stories, myths, philosophies, cosmologies, not to solve the unknown, but to make its edges softer, more bearable. And so, when the Mandela Effect emerged, when whole crowds swore by memories that reality refused to confirm, one explanation rose again and again, whispered like a spell: alternate realities. Imagine for a moment that our universe is not singular, not the only stage upon which existence plays its endless performance. Imagine instead that it is one among countless others, a vast multiverse, each world like a page in an infinite book. On one page, Mandela dies in prison. On another, he lives to see his nation free. On one page, the Monopoly man peers out at us through a monocle. On another, his face is bare. Each timeline slightly different, each variation branching out like the limbs of a cosmic tree. What if, some ask, the Mandela Effect is not merely the failure of memory, but the scar left behind when we shift from one branch to another? Perhaps we do not notice the transition. We simply awaken in a universe almost identical to the one we knew, save for a few subtle cracks. A logo spelled differently, a quote spoken in another way, a detail so small it seems insignificant, until you realize that your mind insists otherwise. This theory has a strange allure, because it offers dignity to our errors. If memory is fragile, then perhaps we are just mistaken. But if alternate realities exist, then our memories are not wrong. They are true, just not true here. They are the residue of a different life, a different version of the world, one that slipped away like a dream upon waking. Some imagine it as timelines colliding, brushing against each other, leaving traces behind. Others see it as individuals sliding between realities, carrying with them fragments of the world they left behind. The multiverse becomes not a distant theory of physics, but a lived experience haunting the edges of our everyday lives. Of course, skeptics point out the flaws. If timelines are infinite, why do the shifts always seem so small, so trivial? Why does no one remember a radically different world? One where continents are shaped differently, or where technology leapt ahead centuries early? Why is it always cereal boxes and children's books? Yet for those who feel the certainty of their false memories, such questions do little to weaken the conviction. After all, if you can recall a reality that never was, even in something as small as a logo, then perhaps the barrier between worlds is thinner than we think. Physics itself flirts with these ideas. Quantum theory, with its shimmering probabilities, suggests that particles exist in many states at once, collapsing only when observed. The multiverse, proposed by some interpretations, imagines that every possibility is realized, every choice, every variation, branching into a new reality. To live within that framework is to accept that other versions of us are out there, walking down different streets, carrying different memories, living different truths. So when people whisper that the Mandela Effect is proof of alternate realities, they are not simply indulging in fantasy. They are reaching for a story that fits the enormity of the mystery. They are giving shape to the vertigo of remembering differently than the world allows. Whether or not the multiverse explains it, the theory endures because it satisfies a deeper hunger. The hunger to believe that our memories, however fragile, carry weight. That they are not just mistakes, but keys to hidden doors in the architecture of existence. Perhaps the Mandela Effect is nothing more than a trick of the mind, or perhaps it is a trail of breadcrumbs scattered across universes, leading us toward a truth too vast for any single timeline to contain. Memory, they tell us, is a map, something solid, dependable, drawn once and carried for life. But what if memory is not a map at all, but a sea, a tide that ebbs and flows, sometimes carrying us toward distant shores, other times pulling us under with a wave that feels familiar but is, in truth, entirely new? The Mandela Effect breathes in these waters, between what we believe we once saw and what the world insists has always been. Consider the stars. For countless generations, people have looked up at the night sky and sworn that Orion's belt shone just so, that the North Star aligned just here, that a certain constellation was visible from their childhood home. Yet astronomers remind us that the heavens shift, that stars are born and extinguished, that even their light is delayed, reaching us from a past that no longer exists. So, are we recalling what we truly saw, or what our minds have painted in the absence of permanence? The Mandela Effect whispers that our personal constellations, the stories we string together in memory, may not match the great chart of the universe. One person remembers a cereal box with a cartoon character smiling just a bit wider. Another recalls the shape of a country on the map, leaning slightly in a different direction. To the rational mind, these are errors, tricks of recall, simple misfires in the brain. But to the dreamer, they are stars shifting places in the sky of consciousness. They are proof that our inner universe is not fixed, but alive, breathing, rewriting itself in secret. What makes the effect so haunting is not just the difference between what we remember and what exists, but the shared certainty among strangers. Thousands, sometimes millions, will agree on the same false memory. It is as though an unseen hand has redrawn the constellations, not in the sky, but in the collective human mind. A great celestial sleight of hand. So when you tilt your head back tonight and watch the glittering scatter of stars, ask yourself, are you gazing at the heavens as they truly are, or at a canvas that has already been repainted without your knowing? Are you looking outward or inward, at the shifting stars of memory, where truth and illusion trade places with the grace of dancers in the dark? And if you cannot tell the difference, does it even matter? Perhaps the stars of memory are the only ones that have ever mattered at all. Imagine walking into a library that has no walls, no roof, no visible end. The shelves extend infinitely, holding every memory, every thought, every dream you have ever had. Some books are crisp and clear, pages aligned neatly with the sharpness of certainty. Others are weathered, the ink smudged, the words rewritten by hands you do not recognize. This is the library of the human mind, and somewhere between its endless shelves lies the Mandela Effect. In this place, a curious thing happens. You pull a book labeled Childhood, expecting to see the same passages you have always known. The covers of the books you read, the jingles of the shows you loved, the lines of dialogue that shaped your laughter. But when you open it, the words have shifted. The character you swore wore a monocle is suddenly barefaced. The cereal you recall with a double O is spelled with a single one. The library insists this has always been the way, and yet your heart protests. No, it was different. I remember, the Mandela Effect lives in that protest, in the quiet rebellion of the soul against the authority of the world outside. It is the moment when the library of your mind and the library of reality fall out of sync. And perhaps the most unsettling part is not that your book differs, but that others too pull the same volume from their shelves and find the same discrepancy. Strangers on opposite ends of the earth who never spoke a word to each other recall the exact same vanished truth. Why? Is the library rewriting itself? Or are we, the readers, slipping between parallel stacks, borrowing volumes from another version of ourselves in another aisle of existence? Some philosophers whisper that every possibility exists simultaneously, that each shelf leads not just deeper into memory but sideways, into another world entirely. If so, then the Mandela Effect is the whisper of the librarian, an unseen hand misfiling a book, letting us glimpse the words of a different universe before snapping it shut again. And maybe, just maybe, that is why these false memories feel so stubborn, so immovable, because in some other library, in some other corridor of infinity, those words are not false at all. They are the truth. So the next time you feel a flicker of doubt, when the world insists the book has always read one way, and yet your heart knows another version, pause. Consider that you may have stumbled into the library of forgotten truths, where memory and reality blur, and the shelves keep secrets. Even the universe is reluctant to reveal. Close your eyes for a moment and listen, not to the noise of your room, not to the sounds of life surrounding you, but to something deeper. Beneath the hum of existence there lies an echo, faint and elusive, like a voice calling through a long corridor. The Mandela Effect is this echo, not a sound of the present, but a resonance from another version of reality, brushing against our own. Think of a canyon. You shout your truth into its depths. The man had a monocle, the logo had a dash, the movie line was spoken differently. And back comes the echo. Sometimes it repeats your truth perfectly, but other times it returns distorted, shifted, carrying words you don't recall saying. And here's the haunting part. Millions of others swear they heard the same distorted echo, the same alternate version of the phrase, the same misplaced detail. It is not merely your own voice you hear, but the chorus of countless others across the world, echoing back to you with certainty. Some say these echoes are proof of parallel timelines brushing together, bleeding into one another like ink on wet paper. Two versions of the world, once separate, overlap for just a moment, and our memories capture the residue. Others argue it is our minds themselves, constructing illusions, misfiring neurons, confabulating details that never were. But if it were only error, why then do we misremember together? Why do strangers carry the same echo of a world that never existed? It is as though, somewhere beyond sight, a second world stands close, so close its breath fogs the glass that separates us. And every so often the barrier thins, a memory slips through, a phrase, a detail, a certainty that feels alien yet familiar. We live in one world but dream in the other, and in our dreams, both are real. The Mandela Effect invites us to entertain this possibility, that our memories are not mistakes but messages, whispers across dimensions, reverberations from timelines where history wrote itself differently. When we recall something the world denies, perhaps it is not that we are wrong, but that we are listening to an echo, one that proves we are more than the sum of this single version of reality. So when you catch yourself hearing that faint discord, when the echo in your mind does not align with the world outside, pause, lean into it. Because maybe, just maybe, you are catching the faint sound of another life, another universe, brushing past yours like a shadow in the night. There is a place inside the mind, a chamber most people never dare to enter. It is not locked, but it hides itself in silence, waiting for the moment when memory falters and reality stumbles. Step into it, and you will find yourself surrounded by mirrors, not the kind that merely show your reflection, but mirrors that shimmer and ripple, as though they are alive. Each one offers a different version of you, a different version of your past, a different arrangement of the world itself. This is the room of shifting mirrors, where the Mandela Effect takes shape like a ghost of memory made visible. At first, the mirrors show you what you expect, your childhood bedroom as you remember it, your favorite toy resting on the shelf, the warm glow of a lamp. But as you look closer, the details unravel. The toy is not the one you remember. The lamp is the wrong color. The book on the table carries a title you've never read, though something deep within insists you once did. The room feels familiar yet wrong, comforting yet unsettling. You reach out, and the glass ripples under your fingertips, as though reality itself were made of water. The Mandela Effect thrives here. One mirror shows you a fruit logo with a cornucopia spilling abundance across the design, just as you've always recalled it. Another shows the logo stripped bare, as if the horn of plenty never existed at all. You stand between them, trapped between two competing truths, each one equally convincing. Which is real? Which is false? And perhaps the more important question, does it even matter if both feel undeniably true to the self that is staring back at you? As you wander deeper into this chamber, you notice something stranger still. Some mirrors do not reflect you at all. They reflect us, countless faces, countless voices, people you have never met who share your same fractured memory, strangers scattered across the globe, all recalling the same alternate version of the world. Their certainty mirrors yours. Their voices overlap with your own. They too stand before these shifting panes of glass, pointing, insisting, doubting, wondering. It is not a solitary hallucination, but a collective haunting. Psychologists might say the mirrors are tricks of cognition, confabulations, false reconstructions of events. They would argue that memory is not a photograph but a painting, repainted each time we revisit it. And perhaps they are right. But if so, then why do so many of us repaint with the same peculiar brushstroke? Why do the mirrors of so many minds ripple in unison, revealing the same alternate picture, the same impossible version of reality? Others whisper of parallel timelines, suggesting that each mirror reflects not illusion but truth. Truths from different branches of existence bleeding into one another. Maybe the mirror that shows the logo with the cornucopia is not wrong at all. Maybe it is simply elsewhere. A version of the world where the detail was real, and you, through some sliver in the veil, caught sight of it. And so you stand there, surrounded by mirrors, surrounded by truths that contradict yet coexist. For a moment, the very idea of reality loses its weight. What if truth is not a single reflection, but the shimmer between them? What if the Mandela Effect is not a failure of memory, but an invitation, an opening into the room of shifting mirrors, where the self is allowed to glimpse the impossible, if only for a heartbeat? You turn to leave, but something follows. The mirrors ripple as you pass, each one whispering a different version of your story. One says you left the room long ago. Another insists you are still trapped inside. Another laughs softly, as though amused by your confusion. And as you step back into the ordinary world, you carry their whispers with you, unsure which reflection belongs to you, or whether they all do. The Mandela Effect lingers like that, a shimmer in the corner of the mind, a mirror you cannot stop glancing back at, even when you tell yourself to forget. Picture this: billions of minds scattered across the world, each dreaming alone. At night, our dreams feel private, fragments stitched from our fears, our longings, our hidden memories. But what if those dreams are not sealed within us? What if they are rivers flowing into the same ocean, mingling, overlapping, becoming something greater than the sum of their parts? This ocean is the collective dreaming, and the Mandela Effect may be its tide washing back upon us. We like to believe our memories are ours alone, etched uniquely into the folds of our brain. But the Mandela Effect reveals cracks in that illusion. How can it be that a child in Brazil, a grandmother in Japan, a teenager in South Africa, and a scholar in Canada all recall the same detail that the official record denies? They never met, never spoke, never shared a culture or a language, and yet their memories echo one another with uncanny precision. It is as if they dreamed the same dream. Some whisper that humanity itself dreams collectively, and the Mandela Effect is proof of those shared visions leaking into waking life. It is not the mistake of individuals, but the memory of an entire species stirring in unison. The forgotten cornucopia, the misplaced map, the misquoted line. These are not isolated confusions, but fragments of a communal narrative, a parallel story humanity has been dreaming together without realizing it. Imagine walking into a great cathedral with no roof, where the voices of countless choirs overlap. Each voice sings a slightly different song, but together they create a harmony so vast it shakes the air. The Mandela Effect is like one of those notes rising higher than the rest, cutting through the collective symphony. It does not belong to you alone, but to the entire choir of humanity. That is why the sensation is so eerie. It feels like more than just your mistake. Because it is. What if memory is not confined to the individual mind at all? What if we are receivers, tuning into frequencies that belong to the greater field of consciousness? One frequency shows you this world. Another reveals a world nearly identical, but not quite. And sometimes, for reasons science cannot yet explain, the dial slips. You catch a frequency that was never meant to be yours. Someone across the planet catches the same one. And when you both wake, you carry that shared frequency as a memory, certain it was always the truth. Perhaps this is why the Mandela Effect feels so powerful, because it exposes the possibility that we are not separate, not isolated minds drifting in solitude. We are dreamers connected by invisible threads, painting and repainting the canvas of reality together. The collective dreaming may be the great unseen engine, a cosmic loom weaving all possibilities into tapestries of memory. And every so often, a loose thread dangles. We tug at it, confused, wondering why it does not match the pattern we thought was true. The Mandela Effect is that loose thread, strange, dissonant, but shimmering with the possibility that our minds are not alone, that we are all dreaming one enormous dream, stitched across the fabric of the universe, and occasionally we awaken to the realization that the dream is not ours alone, but humanity's. What happens when enough people remember something that never was? Does the weight of their belief leave the world unchanged? Or can it bend reality itself, subtly, invisibly, until what was once false begins to crystallize into truth? The Mandela Effect raises this unsettling possibility. That memory is not a passive recorder of reality, but an active architect, reshaping the world through the sheer gravity of collective conviction. Think of cities. Skyscrapers, bridges, and monuments exist not just because of stone, steel, and concrete, but because people believed they should exist. Ideas become blueprints. Belief becomes construction. What if memory works in the same way? When millions recall a phrase differently, or picture a logo with elements that never existed, perhaps they are not mistaken at all. Perhaps they are pulling on the threads of reality, forcing it to acknowledge their version, even if only for an instant. You've felt it before, haven't you? That uncanny flicker where the world seems to pause, as though it is recalibrating. You look at a logo, a word, a line from a beloved movie, and you know it was once different. Your certainty does not come from logic, but from something deeper, a bone-deep recognition, a pulse of knowing, and yet the world denies it. Still, you hesitate, because in that hesitation, a thought arises. What if I am right, and reality is wrong? This is where the Mandela Effect transcends memory and enters the domain of creation. Belief is a force. It shapes nations, religions, revolutions. If belief can topple empires and birth civilizations, why not also sculpt the very details of existence? Perhaps every shared false memory is an imprint, a ripple in the field of possibility, tugging the fabric of the present toward a different shape. The scientist might laugh, insisting memory cannot rewrite physics. But even science acknowledges the strange pliability of reality at its smallest scales. Quantum theory whispers of particles existing in multiple states until observed. Consciousness itself, some suggest, collapses the wave of probability into the firmness of matter. If observation can shape the microscopic, why not memory on the grand scale of the human mind? Imagine memory as clay. One person shaping it is a child's effort, fragile and uncertain. But millions pressing their hands into the same shape. Millions recalling a logo that never existed, or a line spoken differently. Could they not leave an imprint deep enough that reality itself remembers? Could they not cause the world to blink for just a fraction of a second and adjust to their belief? Perhaps that is why the Mandela Effect feels so haunting. Not just because we misremember, but because somewhere, deep within, we fear that memory may not merely record reality, but alter it. That each insistence, each certainty shared by strangers across the globe, might be bending the present toward the shape of forgotten dreams. And if that is true, then the question is no longer whether the Mandela Effect is real. The question becomes, what else have we reshaped without knowing it? Reality, for all its mystery, behaves like a river. It flows, sometimes swiftly, sometimes slow, carrying us with it whether we will or not. But when too many stones are thrown into the stream, too many memories contradicting its path, does the river not ripple, surge, fight to preserve its course? The Mandela Effect hints at this hidden struggle, that while our minds tug at the threads of existence, Reality itself may push back, correcting, resisting, guarding its own fragile coherence. You've felt it, that subtle unease when you are certain of a memory, and yet every trace of it in the outside world denies you. Old books yield no proof, photographs betray no hint. The internet insists you are mistaken. It is not simply absence. It feels deliberate, as though the world has scrubbed away the evidence, leaving you stranded with nothing but your certainty. In those moments, it feels less like you are misremembering, and more like reality has actively erased what you know to be true. Is it possible the universe polices itself, that when a memory too strong, too widespread, threatens to alter the pattern, reality snaps taut like an elastic band, correcting the distortion? Perhaps that is why we feel gaslit not only by others but by existence itself. The pushback is quiet but undeniable. It feels like a hand reaching out of the void to cover your mouth, whispering, "No, that never happened." Yet the cracks remain. The denials never erase the certainty within. The pushback cannot stop the whispers between strangers who share the same impossible memory. And so a tension builds, memory pulling one way, reality anchoring the other. The Mandela Effect becomes not just a puzzle, but a battle, a tug of war between human consciousness and the stubborn fabric of the world. What if reality is alive in its own way? Not a passive backdrop, but an organism with its own instinct for survival. Every time a mass memory diverges, it resists, snapping back to maintain its continuity, its story. Like a body rejecting a foreign presence, reality rejects alterations that threaten its integrity. And yet, just as every scar tells the story of past wounds, perhaps each Mandela Effect is a scar upon the universe, evidence that it was not unscathed, that it had to heal against the pressure of our collective remembering. The thought is chilling, that we are not only participants in reality, but adversaries to it, tugging at the fabric while it tugs back. Each side struggling for control of the narrative, each side shaping the world in silence. And perhaps the unease we feel when facing the Mandela Effect is not simply confusion, but the echo of that hidden conflict. The awareness that the world we walk upon is not fixed, but contested ground. And if reality does fight back, what happens when we pull too hard? There is a question whispered in the quiet corners of thought, the kind of question that chills even as it fascinates. What if reality cannot hold forever? For all its strength, for all its resistance, there may come a moment when the pressure of collective memory outweighs the structure of the world itself. The Mandela Effect may not simply be a curiosity, not merely a ripple in the fabric. It may be the rehearsal for a fracture, the rehearsal for a break. Imagine a dam holding back a great reservoir. At first, the water presses gently, testing the walls. The dam resists, enduring the strain. But with time, the cracks spread, the pressure grows. Every false memory, every shared certainty that denies the official story becomes another drop against the wall. And when enough drops gather, the wall does not bend. It shatters. What then? When the dam of reality gives way, we think of the Mandela Effect as small things. Logos, names, film lines, the geography of familiar maps. But what if those are only the safe fractures, the tiny leaks we are allowed to see? What happens when the cracks spread further into history itself? What if one day we awaken to find a war we swore happened is absent from the books, or that a figure we revered as a leader never lived at all? What if monuments disappear not only from memory, but from stone? What if, as we insist on our versions, the world begins to yield? Reality may resist, but what if resistance is not infinite? What if enough of us remembering something differently can remake it? A tipping point could arrive, a moment where reality no longer pushes back, but caves in, rearranging itself to match the weight of our conviction. A moment when the collective dream of humanity becomes stronger than the script reality has been following. And the unsettling thought is this: would we even notice? If reality broke, if it rewrote itself to match the dream of the many, who among us could point to the rupture? Perhaps the ones left behind, the few whose memories did not align with the new order, would feel stranded, screaming into the void that the world had changed while everyone else moved forward without hesitation. They would be dismissed as mistaken, delusional, lost in nostalgia. Yet perhaps they would be the last witnesses to the moment the dam burst. The Mandela Effect is the whisper of that possibility, the tremor before the quake, the ripple before the wave. It is a reminder that what we call reality may not be unshakable stone, but fragile glass. And every false memory, every shared misremembering is a tap against that glass. One day, the pressure may be too much. One day, the shatter may come. And when it does, when reality finally breaks, we may not hear the sound of the world collapsing. We may only feel it as déjà vu, as the strange sense that things are not as they were, even though no one else remembers differently. We may already be living inside the cracks, mistaking them for the whole. Perhaps that is the greatest secret of the Mandela Effect. It is not a glitch, not an error, not a flaw. It is a warning, a quiet reminder that the world we cling to is not unbreakable. And one day, it may collapse beneath the weight of our own remembering. Every story begins with a crack. Before the avalanche, there is the faint splinter in the ice. Before the collapse, there is the trembling of the first stone. The Mandela Effect is no different. It too began with whispers, with small fractures in time that seemed harmless at first, like curiosities passed between friends. But look closer, and you begin to see these fractures were not small at all. They were the first tremors of something vast, something that still moves beneath the surface of our shared reality. The earliest and most famous fracture bore the name from which this entire phenomenon takes its title. Nelson Mandela. Thousands, perhaps millions, swore they remembered him dying in prison during the 1980s. They remembered the funeral, the mourning, the speeches of grief that rippled across the globe. They recalled the news broadcasts, the solemn faces of anchors delivering the story. It was not a vague impression, it was specific, vivid, etched deep. And yet, the official record insists he was released, became president, and lived until 2013. Two realities, two histories, both carried with certainty by those who lived through them. How do we explain such a fracture? Was it the fault of memory, an error magnified by time? Or was it something far stranger, a sliver of another timeline colliding with our own, where Mandela's story ended differently? Whatever the cause, this fracture was the first great crack in the dam, the first time people began to realize their private unease was shared, that others remembered the same impossible truth. It was as though a hidden seam in time had split open, and we had all glimpsed another thread of history running parallel to our own. But the Mandela memory was not alone. Soon others followed. The beloved children's book series many swore was titled The Berenstain Bears with an E, not Berenstain with an A. The cartoon character with a monocle that suddenly was gone. The line from a film, misremembered not by one, but by millions. Each fracture spread like cracks across glass. Small at first, but undeniable when seen together. And what unsettled people most was not the details themselves. It was the realization that these were not isolated mistakes. They were collective. They were echoes of something larger, louder, stranger than individual error. Think of time as a great stained glass window. From afar, it appears whole, seamless, unbroken, but walk closer, and you notice hairline fractures, faint but spreading, dividing the picture into almost imperceptible variations. The Mandela Effect is those fractures made visible, the proof that even time itself may not be as unyielding as we believe. And if these were only the first fractures, what lies beyond them? How many more cracks wait unseen, waiting to widen? How many moments of history have already split, leaving us living in a collage of overlapping truths? Perhaps we are walking not on a single path of time, but on a mosaic of fractured realities, pieced together imperfectly, carrying within us memories from corridors we no longer walk. The first fractures were warnings. They were the subtle shifting of the ground beneath our feet. And if we are attentive, we might see them for what they are. Not mistakes, not illusions, but signs of something greater. Signs that the world is not as whole as it pretends to be. Do you remember the books you once held as a child? The ones you clutched at bedtime, their edges fraying, their pages softened by small fingers and countless retellings. Perhaps your parents read them aloud, or perhaps you whispered the stories to yourself in the half-light of a lamp. The details seemed so simple then, so solid, so unshakable. A bear who was friendly, a title etched in bold letters, a family of characters you thought you knew like neighbors. And yet now, when you return to them as an adult, the spell feels broken. The title looks misspelled, the names altered, the words bent in ways that your memory never agreed to. The world whispers, it was always this way, but your heart protests. No, I remember something different. This is the essence of the Mandela Effect. wrapped in childhood nostalgia. For many, it is the case of the Berenstain Bears, or should I say Berenstein. Generations insist they grew up with the latter, a neat stein that rolled off the tongue, familiar, natural. And yet, the books on every dusty shelf proclaim Berenstain. The truth printed in ink contradicts the truth printed in memory. Which one do we trust? Do we betray the tenderness of childhood recollection, or do we yield to the authority of the page? Neither answer feels entirely satisfying because both truths seem to exist in parallel. What happens then when these subtle fractures multiply across a population? A simple children's book becomes a battleground for timelines, a puzzle piece in the larger tapestry of distorted memory. One child's recollection becomes an adult's insistence, and soon millions echo the same doubt. I could swear it was different. Suddenly, a memory that should have been small and private is transformed into a collective chant. It feels like déjà vu stretched across society, as if we are all caught in the same dream that no one remembers falling into. But childhood echoes hold more power than nostalgia. They are the bedrock of identity. They remind us who we were before the world became complicated. So when those echoes twist, when they betray us, it feels as though our very past is being tampered with. Were we misremembering, or was something, or someone, rewriting the lines while we weren't looking? The Mandela Effect exploits this vulnerability. It does not just toy with memory, it toys with trust. If the stories we read as children can't be trusted to stay consistent, then what can? There is something profoundly unsettling about realizing the universe you believed in at age 5 doesn't align with the one you inhabit now. And perhaps that is why the Mandela Effect so often reaches back to childhood. It targets the years when memory was pure, unarmored, sacred. It reaches into the nursery, the playground, the bedtime story, and whispers, "You were wrong," or maybe worse, "You were right, but the world changed around you." The whisper of childhood echoes is not just about books or logos or songs. It is about the fragility of foundations, how easily the soil beneath us can shift. It is about sitting in your old bedroom, holding a toy, flipping through a beloved story, and feeling a pang of betrayal so sharp it cuts across decades. We are not just remembering words or images, we are remembering the comfort they gave us, the certainty they promised. And when that comfort shatters, we are left adrift, wondering whether the past we hold is ours at all. Tell me, do you remember the way it used to be, or do you only remember the way you thought it was? Everywhere you turn, the modern world is branded, a swoosh, a golden arch, 2 red letters stacked against one another. We know them so well that they feel stitched into the fabric of daily life. You do not need to see the entire name. A single curve or shade is enough to summon recognition. These logos are the icons of trust, the symbols of permanence. But what if permanence is only an illusion? What if the logos that seemed eternal in your mind have been shifting in the shadows, subtly redrawn while you weren't looking? Take the fruit that so many swear once had a leaf at its top, the Apple logo, clean, minimalist, iconic. Yet some recall it differently, a tiny green leaf that was once more prominent, sharper, larger, almost cartoonish compared to the sleek silhouette we accept today. Was it ever so? Or was it only memory layering imagination onto simplicity? The brain, after all, craves completion. A circle with a bite feels naked without a flourish of green. Perhaps our own minds painted what wasn't there. Or consider the most whispered of these confusions, the famous fruit drink. Many insist it was spelled Fruit Loops, an innocent cereal ringed in childhood mornings, sweet as rainbow milk. But the box in every grocery store declares otherwise. Fruit Loops. Fruit, a playful corruption, seems obvious once you see it. Yet it strikes the memory as fraudulent, as if someone slid it into your field of vision while you were distracted. You didn't imagine bowls of fruit, you poured fruit, and now you're told you never did. Logos and brand names are more than words or designs. They are anchors of routine. They rest in the corner of your eye during a morning commute. They glow across storefronts at midnight. They hum in commercials that repeat until they become lullabies. To have one of them twist in your recollection is not just a marketing quirk. It is an assault on consistency. It feels like a small rewriting of reality's surface, an edit to the script of daily life. Why does the Mandela Effect so often fix itself onto these logos? Perhaps because they live in the background of existence. You never truly studied the Kit Kat logo, yet you know it, or think you do. Did it have a hyphen Kit Kat? Or was it always Kit Kat? Millions insist the dash was once there, clean and deliberate. And yet every archive resists them, denying what their minds hold with certainty. Here then is the unsettling paradox. How can something so omnipresent, so universally seen, exist in two versions, one etched in memory, the other printed in ink? Some say it is the brain economizing, compressing shapes into patterns it can easily store. Others whisper of timelines overlapping, like glass sheets slid across one another until details blur. Whatever the cause, the effect is undeniable. People who have never met, never spoken, will insist in unison that a logo looked different, that a word was spelled another way, and somehow that collective conviction feels heavier than the evidence against it. The logos that lie quietly are more than design puzzles. They are psychological riddles. They ask us to weigh two truths, the one we carry inside and the one the world insists upon. When those truths collide, something cracks, and through that crack pours doubt. If a cereal box can lie, if a logo can rewrite itself, what else in this life is not as we recall? And so, a simple dash, a playful vowel, a missing leaf. These small alterations open wide corridors of questioning. They remind us that memory is a shaky architect, and perception is not a mirror but a painter. And yet the haunting question remains. Are we misremembering logos, or are the logos misremembering themselves? Music is memory's accomplice. It seeps into the marrow of time, attaching itself to moments so tightly that to hear a certain melody is to fall back into an old version of yourself. And yet the Mandela Effect shows us that the songs we swear we know, the lyrics we could belt with unthinking ease, often slip from truth. They bend, they distort, they rewrite themselves inside our recollection until the version we sing is not the one that ever existed. Think of Queen, their anthem echoing across stadiums, parties, childhood bedrooms, the closing chant of "We Are the Champions." You can hear it, can't you? The rise, the swell, the defiance in Freddie Mercury's voice. Of the world. But listen to the recording and the phrase vanishes like smoke. It's not there at the triumphant finale, not the way so many millions insist it should be. Did we all just collectively hallucinate those words? Or was there once a version where Mercury did belt them out, and we are haunted by its ghost? Then comes the world of cinema turned to soundbite. Darth Vader, looming mechanical breath filling the void. Luke, I am your father. A line etched in pop culture so deeply that it feels sacrosanct. And yet the script resists us. He never says Luke. The line is clipped, clinical. No, I am your father. But tell that to the endless chorus of voices repeating it otherwise, from playgrounds to parodies. Did we mishear, or did we reshape the line to fit the rhythm of memory? Songs, lines, catchphrases, they live not in ink but in air. They are carried by mouths, repeated from person to person, from decade to decade. And each repetition is an opportunity for distortion. The human ear is not a recorder, it is a sieve. And through it words slip, syllables blur, notes melt into each other. When thousands mishear together, the mishearing becomes the memory. And suddenly, an entire culture sings a lyric that never was, believing it with the confidence of gospel. But there is a deeper question here. Why are the misremembered versions always the ones that feel right? Luke, I am your father has weight, clarity, drama. Of the world feels like the natural climax to Queen's anthem. Are we rewriting reality to better suit our narrative expectations? Is memory editing the world so the story makes more sense? If so, then the Mandela Effect is less a glitch of memory and more an act of unconscious storytelling. We aren't just remembering, we are reauthoring. Still, the unease lingers, because when enough people sing the wrong words feel correct. When the collective insists on an alternate lyric, the alternate lyric becomes an alternate truth. The Mandela Effect thrives in this chorus, where millions misremember together, weaving illusions into the fabric of culture until we cannot tell which version was original and which version was born of the crowd. So the next time you hum along to a song you think you know, pause, listen carefully, ask yourself, am I singing the song or am I singing the memory of the song? A memory polished, edited, and shared by countless voices before me. Cinema is our shared dreamscape. We step into darkened theaters, surrender to flickering light, and let the screen project not just a story, but a memory waiting to be etched. These memories often feel sharper than reality itself. A line, a gesture, a climactic moment can survive decades, echoing in our minds with unwavering clarity. And yet, the Mandela Effect reminds us that the silver screen does not always match the movie reel playing in our heads. Consider the genie who never was. For countless people, the memory of a goofy, blue-costumed Sinbad playing a genie in a 90s children's movie is so strong it feels undeniable. They can recall scenes, VHS covers, even moments of dialogue. Yet no such film exists. The movie they describe, Shazam, never made it to theaters, never sat on a rental shelf, never ran on cable television. Some suggest they are blending fragments of Kazam, starring Shaquille O'Neal, with Sinbad's other appearances. But others insist the memory is too vivid, too communal. They didn't dream it alone. They remember a film that never lived, or take the childhood image of Snow White. We see the Queen at her mirror, dramatic, poised, her words etched into cultural folklore. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? Every child knows it. Every parody repeats it. But in the original Disney film, she never says, mirror, mirror. She says magic mirror, a subtle change, a tiny detail, and yet the version we remember is not the version that was ever spoken. How does a misquote become more enduring than the truth itself? Another haunting case, the Monopoly Man. Can you see him? The jovial, rotund figure, top hat gleaming, cane in hand, monocle perched on his eye. Except the monocle never existed. He never wore one. Still, generations insist on remembering it, certain that a detail so obvious could not be invented. But was it invention? Or was it a memory pulled from some alternate reel, a frame that played for just long enough in another reality? The danger of these cinematic and cultural illusions is that they do not rely on obscurity. They are not distant or forgotten. They live in the center of our cultural memory, repeated endlessly, referenced in jokes, art, advertising. And yet, when we return to the source, we find absence where we swore there was presence, difference where we swore there was certainty. Some dismiss these discrepancies as the frailty of recall, the mind patching gaps with stories. Others sense something stranger, that perhaps these iconic misrememberings are not errors, but echoes of parallel reels, as though there exists another cut of the movie, another version of the script, another childhood Saturday morning where the genie was Sinbad, the Queen did say mirror, mirror, and the Monopoly Man squinted through his monocle. The Mandela Effect thrives in these illusions because films are memory magnified. They are more than entertainment. They are benchmarks of eras, containers of emotion. To misremember a film is not just to misplace a detail. It is to feel the ground shift under a moment you thought was eternal. If even the screen can betray us, then what hope is there for the more fragile memories of ordinary life? So perhaps the cinema is not just a stage for actors, but also for memory itself, an ever-shifting projection, flickering, imperfect, leaving us to wonder whether we're watching a story unfold or writing it anew in the theater of the mind. There is a special kind of unease that arises when the world itself seems to shift beneath your gaze. Not logos, not songs, not movies, but maps. Maps are not just drawings. They are promises. They tell us where the oceans curve, where the mountains rise, where nations touch shoulders, and where seas divide them. They are the quiet cartographers of our understanding. And yet, for many, the Mandela Effect has slipped its fingers into geography, reshaping continents and countries in ways that should be impossible. Take New Zealand. Ask some people, and they'll insist that for most of their lives, they remembered it sitting to the northwest of Australia, tucked near the corner of the great continent. Others are certain it was directly east, not southeast. The maps in classrooms, the globes spun by children, the atlases pulled from dusty shelves, all of them now show it southeast of Australia, an island sprawled like a forgotten shadow. But the memory resists. It is not just a personal recollection, it is a collective one, held by thousands across the world who swear their childhood maps painted it differently. Then there is South America. Look at it today, tilted, leaning eastward, like a shoulder slouched toward the Atlantic. And yet countless voices remember it sitting more directly beneath North America, not askew, but aligned. They remember a continent that fit neatly into the global puzzle, not one that appears almost crooked, tilted, leaning toward the horizon. The shift may seem slight, but it carries weight. How can an entire landmass tilt in memory? And what of Africa? Some claim it has drifted, that it once sat lower, farther south, its northern edge not so close to Europe. Others remember Cuba differently, shaped or placed in a way that current maps deny. It is as though the Earth itself has undergone a subtle, secret rearrangement, a cartographic betrayal whispered only in memory. Perhaps it is simply the imprecision of childhood observation. Few of us studied maps with the detail of cartographers. Perhaps the globe in the classroom was poorly printed, tilted, stylized. Yet why then do so many strangers, unconnected, from different countries, recall the same misplacements? Why does the memory of New Zealand's position echo so consistently across thousands of minds? This is no isolated trick of a single imagination. This is a chorus of the displaced. There is something profoundly disorienting about questioning geography. If logos and films can shift, they unsettle our cultural touchstones. But if maps can shift, if the Earth itself seems to move, then what foundation remains? The Mandela Effect in geography feels heavier because it implies more than memory's fragility. It implies a bending of reality's spine. Either the continents have been sliding silently, or our memories are stitched from threads that never existed. Neither answer is comfortable. And so, when people gaze at a globe and whisper, "That's not how I remember it," they are not just recalling paper maps. They are recalling the classrooms where they sat, the teachers who pointed at chalkboards, the afternoons when they spun a globe idly under their hands. They are remembering not geography, but time. And when time and space betray you together, the world itself feels like a stranger. Mascots are not just advertisements. They are companions of childhood, gatekeepers of nostalgia, and living cartoons stitched into our daily lives. They smile at us from cereal boxes, dance across television screens, and wave at us from fast food wrappers. Their faces are not supposed to change. They are meant to be immortal, consistent, a comfort that bridges decades. And yet, in the strange theater of the Mandela Effect, even these cheerful figures betray us. Take Pikachu, the beloved yellow Pokemon, friend to millions across the globe. If you close your eyes and picture him, what do you see? His lightning bolt tail, his bright cheeks, his wide eyes, and for many, the black tip of his tail. Clear as day, yet look now, and the black tip is gone. It never existed, say the records. The tail is pure yellow, but thousands, perhaps millions, protest. They can see it in memory like a photograph. The contrast of black against gold, burned into the childhood afternoons of Pokemon cards and Game Boys. Was it ever truly there? Or did memory, eager for symmetry, paint a detail that reality denies? Then there's Mr. Monopoly, rich Uncle Pennybags, the top-hatted symbol of capitalism's board game. The cane, the tuxedo, the smile, and for so many, the monocle. But check the box, the art, the archives. No monocle ever adorned his face. Still, the phantom lingers. People are so sure of it, they'll argue with conviction. Of course he had one. How else could he be the caricature of wealth? The monocle feels natural, inevitable, and yet it is an invention of memory, stitched into the collective consciousness, passed from one mind to another until it feels like fact. Even the beloved bear of peanut butter jars isn't spared. Ask people about the childhood spread they smeared onto bread, and they'll speak of Jiffy peanut butter. They can see the jar, the label, the playful name, but reality disagrees. It has always been Jif, no Fi. And yet so many swear they ate Jiffy, the memory flavored with the same certainty as the taste of peanuts and jelly. How can taste and vision betray us together so perfectly? What unsettles most is that these mascots and products were not background noise. They were daily presences. They lived in kitchens, in toy boxes, in bedrooms. They stared back at us while we ate breakfast, while we played, while we grew. They were constants in the unpredictable flow of childhood. So when they shift, when Pikachu loses his tail tip, when Mr. Monopoly loses his monocle, when Jif loses its Fi, it feels like our childhood itself has been edited. Perhaps the brain, when confronted with simplicity, hungers for embellishment. Perhaps it adds detail where none existed, a kind of unconscious artistry. But then why do millions add the same detail? Why do strangers, separated by oceans, all remember the same phantom monocle, the same missing tail tip? It is as though memory is not a solitary act but a collective painting. And sometimes, the brushstrokes run against reality. The mascots with shifting faces remind us of something deeply uncomfortable. Even the things we see every day, the things we laugh with, play with, and trust can betray us. Not because they change, but because our minds demand that they did, and in that tiny gap, between the jar on the shelf and the memory in the mind, a universe of unease is born. When the Mandela Effect slips into advertising or film, it unsettles us, but perhaps it can still be dismissed as pop culture noise. Yet when it creeps into literature, into sacred texts, into the words that civilizations have leaned upon for centuries, the unease deepens, because these are not just words on a page. They are pillars of belief, mantras whispered in prayer, lines recited by generations. If even they can shift in memory, then what does permanence mean? Consider the Bible, the most printed, most read book in history. For many, one verse has been repeated so often it feels immovable. Isaiah 11:6. The lion shall lie down with the lamb. The image is powerful, soothing, predator and prey at peace, a symbol of divine harmony. And yet, open the pages today and you'll find something different. The wolf shall dwell with the lamb. No lion, no poetic imagery that has echoed in sermons and paintings for centuries. Just the wolf. Some argue that the lion-lamb pairing was never there, that sermons and art altered it. But for the millions who remember otherwise, the dissonance gnaws. Was it misquoted into existence, or was it erased? Or recall the Lord's Prayer? For many, the words flow like a river, unchanged across decades. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Yet others insist it has shifted to debts or sins, depending on the translation. They swear their churches, their Bibles, their very childhood prayers all carried the same phrasing, until one day the words felt foreign in their own mouths. Is this merely the diversity of translations? Or is memory itself at war with the printed page? The effect does not confine itself to scripture alone. Think of the great works of literature. Sherlock Holmes, sitting in his London flat, pipe in hand. What phrase do you hear? Elementary, my dear Watson. A line so iconic it feels like the cornerstone of his character. But search the canon and the line never appears, not once. It is an invention of culture, a phantom quotation that slipped into collective memory until it felt authentic. We remember it not because it was written, but because it should have been. Even nursery rhymes are not safe. Generations of children sang, "Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies." Many adults recall the line differently. Some remember ashes, ashes. Others, a tissue, depending on where and when they grew up. But the Mandela Effect thrives in this space, convincing people that the version they knew was universal, unchangeable, until confronted with variants that feel utterly alien. Why does it sting more when the Mandela Effect touches scripture, literature, or nursery rhymes? Perhaps because these are not just texts. They are shared rituals, passed down in trust. They bind families, communities, even nations. They are words that seem untouchable, and yet, when they shift, they shake more than memory. They shake meaning. The Mandela Effect whispers through these pages like an unseen editor, leaving us to wonder whether we misquoted the divine, or whether reality itself edited the script of history. In either case, the wound is deep, because when the stories we thought eternal change in our hands, we are left asking, what else has changed without us noticing? There is something quietly miraculous about the idea that the universe, vast, violent, and incomprehensibly large, seems to run on a delicate script of numbers that never waver. The gravitational constant, the speed of light, the fine structure constant, they are like the hidden stitches that keep the cosmos from unraveling. If any one of them were even slightly different, the stars might never ignite, the galaxies might never form, and life would remain only a silent impossibility, a dream that reality itself could never attempt. Think of them as invisible chains, links forged not of matter, but of inevitability. Each constant holds the universe in balance, tethering chaos just enough to allow order to slip through. Imagine the fine structure constant, a number so delicate that if it were off by even a fraction, atoms themselves might collapse. No stars, no chemistry, no story of us. Yet, here we are, floating on a planet where life dares to bloom under the shelter of these unchanging numbers. It is tempting to believe these constants are simply facts of nature, no more curious than the color of the sky or the pull of the tide. But beneath the comfort of their stability lurks a deeper mystery. Why these numbers? Why this exact arrangement, so absurdly precise that the universe can cradle life instead of crumbling into silence? Some say it is chance, the cosmic equivalent of rolling dice and somehow landing on the only winning combination. Others whisper of necessity, that there could never have been another way, that reality itself has only one possible script. And then, there are those who suspect intention, that these numbers are not accidents, but signatures, quiet brushstrokes left by something vast and unknowable. To follow this line of thought is to wander into dangerous territory, where science meets philosophy and the questions grow heavier than the answers. The constants become not just numbers, but riddles written into the foundation of existence. They force us to ask whether the universe is coldly indifferent or quietly generous, as if the very act of existence has bent itself toward allowing life to emerge. And here, the paradox blooms. These constants are unchanging, eternal, yet our lives within them are fleeting. They are the steady backdrop against which our brief stories unfold. They will outlast our species, our planet, even our galaxy, as stars collapse and new ones are born. But while they endure, we too endure, carried along by their invisible chains. Perhaps that is the most haunting thought of all, that in their silence, they are not merely keeping the universe alive, but keeping us alive. We are participants in a cosmic balance so fragile it feels like a secret, one whispered only to those who stop long enough to notice it. There is a quiet rhythm beneath the universe, a kind of music that no ear can hear but every atom obeys. It is the whisper of symmetry, the hidden geometry that holds reality together. From the patterns in snowflakes to the spirals of galaxies, symmetry is everywhere, as though the universe is a dancer moving to an unseen score, every step measured, every gesture repeating with grace. At first glance, symmetry feels like beauty for its own sake, the pleasing repetition of forms. But in truth, it is far more than that. Symmetry is a law, a structure, a shield against chaos. Physicists have learned that every symmetry hides a conservation of energy, of momentum, of charge. Each balance is a promise that in the shifting chaos of existence, something endures, something remains untouched. It is as if the universe whispers, "Yes, I change, but I do not break." Imagine a snowflake falling, every branch mirroring another, no part wasted, no angle random. Now imagine the electrons circling the nucleus, obeying invisible symmetries that prevent it from spiraling into collapse. These echoes of order remind us that symmetry is not just ornament, it is survival. Without it, the universe would not merely be less beautiful, it would be impossible. But what is most haunting is not the existence of symmetry, but its fragility. Break it, and new laws appear, new realities unfold. In the early universe, before the first atoms formed, all was symmetrical, uniform, perfectly balanced. And then came the breaking, a shattering so small, so subtle. And yet from that wound, the universe was born. Matter outnumbered antimatter. Light parted from darkness. Galaxies began to spin. From broken symmetry, existence bloomed. There is a poetry in this paradox, that perfection is sterile, but imperfection gives rise to life. Were the universe still perfectly symmetrical, it would be a smooth sea of nothingness. No stars, no planets, no us. But the breaking, the fracture, the imbalance allowed chaos to sculpt beauty. Like cracks in stone that let in flowers, the universe's flaws became its triumph. This thought lingers like a whisper in the mind. If symmetry is the secret skeleton of the universe, then perhaps every act of creation, every word spoken, every memory formed, every heartbeat is just another echo of that ancient fracture. Perhaps our very existence is a ripple of broken balance, a reminder that imperfection is not a failure, but the engine of becoming. And so, when you look at the spiral of a seashell, or the mirrored wings of a butterfly, or the rising arcs of constellations, you are not just looking at beauty. You are glimpsing the hidden truth, that the universe is a tapestry woven from symmetry and from the breaking of it. That perfection is not the final goal, but the canvas from which imperfection paints life into being. There is a strange silence in the idea of time, an endless current that we cannot step out of, a river that sweeps us forward but never back. We do not question it in our daily lives. We wake, we live, we sleep. We age, we wither, we remember. But deep in the roots of physics, time is not supposed to have a direction. The laws that govern the smallest particles work just as well backward as forward. Yet here we are, trapped in one direction, never able to rewind. Why? The answer lies in the fracture of symmetry, the moment the universe chose to break its perfect mirror. Imagine, for a moment, a cosmos at its birth, perfectly symmetrical, timeless in a way. Energy and matter balanced, every particle paired with its twin, every motion mirrored by another. In such perfection, time has no meaning. Without imbalance, there is no before and after, no memory or consequence. But when symmetry broke, when matter gained a tiny edge over antimatter, when heat began to flow from dense to diffuse, when cracks spread through that primal perfection, time awoke. The arrow appeared. Suddenly, there was a past that could not be returned to, and a future that stretched forward into uncertainty. This arrow hides in every detail of our lives. The melting of ice into water, the decay of wood into ash, the fading of stars into darkness. Each is a whisper of broken symmetry, a reminder that what once was cannot be remade. The second law of thermodynamics, that cruel rule of entropy, tells us that disorder always grows, never shrinks. It is not simply a physical truth. It is the very heartbeat of time itself. Without the imbalance, without the crack in the cosmic mirror, we would not know loss, nor memory, nor story. Think of memory for a moment. Why do we remember the past but not the future? Why can we look back at childhood yet never ahead to old age with the same clarity? It is because memory too is born of entropy. The brain records patterns from order slipping into disorder, never the reverse. We are prisoners of asymmetry. Every thought you have ever had, every moment you carry, is written in the script of the universe's fracture. But here is the haunting beauty. Without this break, without the one-way flow, nothing could ever evolve. Stars would not burn, planets would not form, life would not rise, change, and strive. It is precisely because we cannot go back that we can move forward. Time is not simply a chain that binds us. It is the force that allows us to grow, to become, to imagine. We are children of the fracture, born along its river. And yet the question lingers like a shadow. Is the arrow absolute, or is it only local, a trick of our scale of being? On the quantum level, time still dances both ways, refusing allegiance to our sense of flow. Perhaps in some deeper stratum of reality, time has no arrow at all, and what we call past and future are just shadows cast by a symmetry we cannot see. If so, then maybe memory is only a mirror cracked by our limitations. Maybe somewhere, the universe keeps the unbroken record, the symmetry still intact. When we stand at dusk, watching light fade into night, we are seeing entropy. When we blow out a candle, the flame dissolving into smoke, we are seeing the arrow. But in those very moments, we are also glimpsing the deeper truth. The arrow of time is not a curse, but a gift carved out of broken perfection. It is what gives stories their meaning, what gives lives their arc, what gives each moment its ache of impermanence. Without it, there would be no memory, no love, no longing. So perhaps the symmetry did not simply break, it chose to break. Perhaps, in the silence before the beginning, the universe realized that perfection is lifeless, and that only in the fracture could time be born. Only in the fracture could we exist. If the arrow of time is the river that carries us forward, then memory is the raft upon which we drift, trying to hold on to fragments of where we came from. But what if memory is not only a human faculty, not merely neurons firing in fragile patterns? What if memory is woven into the universe itself, echoing through the fabric of existence like a hidden refrain? Think of the stars. Every photon they release carries with it a story, a trace of where it has been. When you look up at the night sky, you are not seeing the stars as they are, but as they were. Sometimes thousands, even millions of years ago. The light is memory, crossing unimaginable distances to whisper to your eyes. This is how I once was. In that sense, the cosmos itself remembers. Every beam of starlight a note in its endless song. The earth remembers too. Its rocks hold the scars of ancient seas. Its mountains carry the wrinkles of slow collisions. Its ice entombs the breath of ages past. The very ground beneath your feet is a palimpsest of memory. One layer written upon another, never truly erased. Even the oceans remember. Their currents circulating the ghosts of climates long gone. Their depths keeping secrets too heavy to rise. But memory is stranger still when seen through the lens of physics. Some theories suggest that information can never truly be destroyed, even when matter collapses into the crushing jaws of a black hole. Stephen Hawking once feared that black holes erased information forever. But later discoveries suggest otherwise, that the universe has safeguards, that the past is never fully lost, only hidden. In other words, even in the most violent erasures, memory persists. And then there is us. Our minds are not separate from this memory web, but are born of it. Neurons firing in electric cascades are not so different from lightning flashing in storms or galaxies colliding in the dark. Each thought we have is not isolated, but an echo of the universe's own unfolding. When you recall your childhood, when you taste nostalgia or ache for something long gone, you are participating in the same act that photons perform, that rocks and rivers perform, preserving a shadow of what has been. Here, the Mandela Effect begins to whisper again. Could it be that our false memories, those haunting recollections of things that never were, are not merely mistakes of the mind, but echoes from another layer of the universe's memory? Perhaps we sometimes tune into a frequency not our own, catching fragments of how events might have been in a different unfolding, a different fracture of symmetry, a cosmic déjà vu. What if memory itself is not personal but collective, woven into the very lattice of reality? What if every person, every mind, is simply a lens, a way for the universe to remember itself? When you dream, when you recall, when you invent stories about your past, perhaps it is not just you remembering. It is the cosmos reflecting back upon its own birth, its own shattering, its own becoming. The haunting thought lingers. We may not be remembering our own lives as much as we are remembering the universe remembering. The Mandela Effect then ceases to be just a quirk of human psychology. It becomes a question of cosmic memory. What if our false recollections are not false at all, but true somewhere, somewhen in the vast memory of existence? There is a moment, subtle and uncanny, when you walk into a room you've never seen before, or hear a sentence spoken for the first time, and suddenly the air thickens with familiarity. You know this moment. You've lived it before, but how? This is déjà vu, the most delicate fracture in our perception of time, a ripple in the memory of the self. It feels like a ghost of the future wearing the mask of the past, or perhaps the universe momentarily repeating its own breath. Scientists, in their careful ways, often explain it as a neurological hiccup, a crossfire between the short-term and long-term memory centers of the brain, making the present feel like a memory, a glitch, nothing more. But deep down, you know it feels larger than that. Déjà vu has an eeriness that cannot be softened by biology. It feels like the universe leaning close, whispering, "You've been here before, though you shouldn't have." What if déjà vu is not a mistake but a glimpse, a fracture where two versions of reality overlap, just for an instant? Perhaps you are walking through the memory of another self, a version of you that chose differently, spoke differently, breathed differently. For a heartbeat, the boundaries dissolve, and your mind remembers something your life never lived. Some say déjà vu is the echo of a dream, a fragment of the night intruding into the day. But even dreams are not free from mystery. Where do they come from? What deep reservoir do they draw upon? Perhaps dreams, too, are portals into the universe's memory. And déjà vu is when that same reservoir spills over into waking life. And then there is the more haunting possibility. Déjà vu as the symptom of a simulation, a flicker where the program stutters, repeating a frame, replaying a moment. If reality is code, then déjà vu is the pause where you see the seam, the slip in the script. But what if it is not error at all? What if it is intentional? A breadcrumb left behind, a way of reminding us that what we call real is stitched together from something deeper. Notice how déjà vu feels not just familiar, but intimate. It is never a grand cosmic event that repeats itself. It is the small things, the way the sunlight falls on a table, the way someone tilts their head as they speak, the exact rhythm of a laugh. Déjà vu lives in the fragile details. Perhaps that is because the universe itself remembers in fragments, not wholes. Just as we cannot recall our lives perfectly, but only in flashes, so too does reality carry its memory in slivers, in sparks. So déjà vu may be more than a neurological stutter. It may be the interface where our personal memory brushes against the universe's memory, where our timeline grazes another. It is the whisper of the cosmos saying, there are more versions of you, more branches of this story, more paths than the one you walk. You may not live them all, but you can feel their shadows. The next time déjà vu wraps around you, do not dismiss it. Linger in it. Feel the weight of it. Ask yourself, whose memory am I standing in? My own or the universe's? Would you like me to take 2.14 into that direction, where we dive into the possibility that déjà vu and collective false memories are signals of overlapping realities bleeding into one another? Imagine for a moment that the universe is not a single thread, but a loom of countless threads woven together. each one a possible version of events, each one a life lived differently. Most of the time, we walk along one thread without awareness of the others, our steps guided by a narrow sense of continuity. But sometimes something slips. The weave phrase, a flicker crosses our vision. Two threads touch, overlap, and for an instant, we feel both at once. This overlap might be what we call déjà vu, or the Mandela Effect, or those eerie sensations of almost remembering things that never happened. It is as if the curtain between realities grows thin, and the echoes of another existence bleed through. A different you, in a slightly different world, glances your way through the fabric. You cannot see them fully, but you feel them, like a breath on the back of your neck. Consider the strange way groups of people sometimes remember the same false detail, the spelling of a word, the color of an object, the death of a figure who is still alive. How could so many minds align on the same illusion? It is easier to dismiss it as faulty memory, yet memory is fragile, individual, and chaotic. To find entire communities convinced of the same error feels like something larger, something collective. What if these are not mistakes at all, but shared glimpses of another reality? One where those details were true. When realities overlap, the seams of existence reveal themselves in peculiar ways. You might dream of a city you have never visited, only to later find yourself standing in its streets, feeling that uncanny familiarity. You might recall a conversation with someone, only to realize it never took place, yet the emotional residue lingers as if it did. These are not just accidents of the brain, they are ripples in the fabric, waves traveling between threads. Physics itself hints at this possibility. Quantum mechanics suggests particles can exist in many states at once, branching into possibilities that only collapse when observed. What if our lives too are quantum in scale? What if every choice, every heartbeat, sends ripples outward into other possibilities, other threads? If so, then perhaps déjà vu and the Mandela Effect are not accidents, but the faint aftershocks of this vast multiverse, colliding with itself in subtle tremors. In those moments when realities overlap, we are offered a kind of haunting grace. We are reminded that our world is not absolute, that what we call truth may be only one version of many. It is unsettling, yes, but also liberating. If reality can blur, then it is not as rigid as we fear. There are more paths than the one we see, more truths than the one we carry. And so, the next time you feel the strangeness of an overlap, the tingling déjà vu, the collective memory that should not exist, pause. For in that pause, you are not just a single self. You are a chorus of selves, a harmony of realities intersecting for a breath. You are standing in the threshold of the multiverse, and for once, you can feel the weight of all that you are, all that you could be. If reality were flawless, seamless, unbroken, would it even be alive? A perfect crystal, flawless in its lattice, is beautiful, yes, but lifeless. Nothing grows there, nothing changes. Perfection is stillness. The universe seems to have understood this from the very beginning, choosing fracture over symmetry, imbalance over stasis, imperfection over sterile beauty. Perhaps that is why we encounter the Mandela Effect, déjà vu, and the strange bleeding of memories, because the fractures are not accidents, they are necessary. Without brokenness, there would be no arrow of time. Without the arrow, no evolution, no stars burning out, no galaxies swirling, no life rising from dust. Without misremembering, perhaps there would be no remembering at all. A flawless memory, infinite in precision, would leave no room for wonder or imagination. Forgetting, distorting, reshaping. These are not errors, but the fertile soil where new meaning grows. In that sense, the Mandela Effect is not a flaw in the human mind, but a continuation of the universe's oldest gesture, breaking symmetry to make life possible. Think of it this way. Each collective false memory, each uncanny déjà vu is like a hairline crack in the mirror of reality. Through it, a light spills in, dim, flickering but undeniable. We glimpse that we are not contained in a single frame but stretched across many, that our story is not singular but braided. These cracks are not weaknesses, they are breathing spaces in the fabric of existence, openings through which the universe remembers itself, reinvents itself, and ensures it will never calcify into silence. Perhaps that is the true necessity of fracture, to remind us that reality is not fixed, that truth is not rigid, that what we believe to be solid may, in fact, be shifting beneath our feet. This is not cause for despair, but for awe. The very uncertainty we fear is the same force that allows creativity, freedom, and life. The cracks are not failures. They are the reason there is anything at all. So when we marvel at the uncanny alignment of false memories, when we pause in the grip of déjà vu, when we feel the eerie tug of overlapping realities, we are not witnessing errors. We are witnessing the pulse of the universe itself. The fracture is the heartbeat. The breaking is the song. The necessity of imperfection is what keeps the cosmos from collapsing into lifeless symmetry. And maybe that is why these experiences resonate so deeply with us. Because we too are fractures. We are not perfect beings. We forget, we misremember, we stumble, we dream. But in those very imperfections lies the essence of being alive. We are, each of us, living echoes of the universe's first great break, carrying forward its lesson that to be flawed is to be real, and to be fractured is to be infinite. Imagine for a moment that memory is not housed solely in the mind, but radiates outward, weaving an invisible web that binds all of us together. Every thought, every recollection, every misremembered fragment floats into this vast field. Over time, these threads converge, knot, and entwine, forming something greater than the sum of individuals, a collective memory. Not simply history, not simply culture, but an architecture of remembrance, as real and enduring as stone. We see it in monuments, in stories passed down, in the quiet rituals of daily life that echo centuries of repetition. Yet beyond these tangible markers, there is a subtler layer. The way whole communities can share a memory that is not true. The way vast groups of strangers insist on the same false detail. The Mandela Effect is not merely a curiosity of the mind. It is a glimpse of this architecture. The false recollection is like a misplaced brick, but if enough people believe it, the structure reshapes itself to fit the error. Reality bends not because the universe is weak, but because memory itself is one of its building materials. Think of the way myths endure. A story told around a fire 10,000 years ago still lingers in our collective bones, influencing the way we imagine gods, heroes, and the cosmos. These stories are not carved into matter, yet they persist as though they were part of the very framework of existence. Why? Because collective memory is not passive. It does not simply record, it constructs. What if the universe itself is participatory, not a rigid machine, but a fluid script? What if each act of remembering is a stroke of ink on that script? And when enough of us remember together, even if falsely, the script edits itself. In this way, the Mandela Effect becomes more than a curiosity. It becomes evidence that collective memory shapes the blueprint of reality, that the architecture is alive, mutable, responsive to the weight of shared belief. Consider the phenomenon of cultural shifts. When entire generations recall events through a particular lens, reality adapts to those interpretations. The facts do not always matter. What survives is the shared remembrance. The architecture tilts. History becomes not what was, but what is remembered. And if the universe listens, if it absorbs these echoes, then collective memory is not just human, but cosmic. It is the scaffolding upon which reality continues to grow. The haunting thought emerges. We may not be living in a universe that dictates truth to us, but in a universe that negotiates truth with us. A co-authored reality where memory is mortar and shared recollection, true or false, is the hand that lays the stones. Long before books, before cities, before history was etched in ink, there were only stories spoken in firelight. Myths were the first architecture of collective memory, rising from the mouths of storytellers and settling into the minds of tribes. These stories were not true in the sense we demand today. There were no dates, no documents, no verifiable events. Yet they carried a truth so profound that they shaped civilizations, bending the very way humans saw the world. Take, for instance, the myth of the flood. It appears in cultures, oceans apart, from Mesopotamia to the Americas. Did a single flood sweep the entire world? Or did the memory of local disasters weave into something larger, becoming a shared cosmic narrative? Perhaps the event itself mattered less than the remembering, the way entire peoples echoed the same story, reshaping their identity and their laws around it. Whether factual or not, the myth became an anchor, a point around which reality was constructed. This is how myths function, not as reports of the past, but as blueprints for the present. When a community believes that the sun is a god driving a chariot across the sky, reality itself shifts. The sun still burns, but the way people orient their lives, their rituals, their calendars, their sense of order, is built around that shared memory. A myth can dictate when to sow and harvest, when to go to war, when to mourn, when to celebrate. It is a scaffolding of life, born from collective remembering. What if myths are the first recorded Mandela effects? Shared false memories passed from one generation to the next, held so deeply that they blur into truth. Did Orpheus really walk into the underworld? Did Gilgamesh really search for immortality? Did gods truly walk among us? In one sense, no. In another, profoundly, yes, because entire societies behaved as if they did. The memory was real enough to build temples, shape laws, inspire wars, and comfort the dying. In this way, the collective memory of myth did not merely reflect reality, it generated it. And perhaps this is why myths linger even after their literal belief fades. Though we may no longer believe that Zeus hurls lightning from Olympus, the echoes of that myth still ripple through language, art, and imagination. The architecture stands, even if the bricks have eroded. The collective memory has already done its work, reshaping human thought and leaving behind a scaffold for new layers of reality to grow upon. So when we marvel at the Mandela Effect, at crowds of strangers recalling the same non-existent detail, we may be witnessing the same ancient force, myth-making in real time. Memory, even when flawed, is never inert. It molds, it guides, it builds. Myths show us that false memory is not weakness, but a tool, one the universe seems willing to honor. Have you ever noticed how some memories seem to have sharp, crystalline edges, while others feel as though they've been sanded down, their corners missing, their clarity smudged like a fogged mirror? The Mandela Effect thrives in those blurred corners, the places where memory bends, twists, and sometimes breaks under the weight of collective belief. Think of your own life, events you swear happened a certain way, yet when you return to them, the evidence disagrees. A favorite childhood cartoon character whose catchphrase sounds different when replayed. A book cover you could describe in detail that turns out never to have existed. Or the very spelling of a word you thought you knew by heart, now altered beyond recognition. These are the missing corners of memory, where certainty erodes and doubt seeps in. Psychologists tell us that memory isn't a recording device. It's a reconstruction, fragile, pliable, and easily swayed by repetition or suggestion. Yet what happens when thousands, even millions, share the same reconstruction, the same mistaken detail? Could this be mass error, or is there something stranger at play? The Mandela Effect challenges us with a haunting question. Are these gaps simply glitches in our biology, or are they hints of a deeper fracture in reality itself? Perhaps these missing corners are not holes in memory, but doorways, subtle passages to truths our conscious minds can't fully grasp. As you let this thought settle, imagine standing at the edge of a vast library where entire chapters are missing. You turn the pages and realize the story isn't wrong, it's rewritten. And then, you hear a voice whisper from somewhere between the lines. Which version do you trust? The one you remember, or the one that remains? There is something deeply unsettling about realizing that your memory is not just your own, but a thread interwoven with millions of others. A single false recollection may be brushed aside as human error, but when entire groups, entire cultures, share the exact same misremembering, it begins to feel less like a mistake and more like a pattern. A pattern that whispers of something larger than the self, larger than the mind. Think about the word illusion. We often imagine it as a trick of the eyes, a magician's sleight of hand, something external. But what if illusions aren't confined to what we see? What if they extend into what we remember, infecting not just the surface of perception, but the architecture of time itself? The Mandela Effect is heavy because it drags memory out of the private and into the public. It is not just you who swears that a logo looked different, or that a movie line had different words. It's everyone around you, and suddenly, you're not doubting your memory alone. You're doubting the very framework of reality. Because if all of us can be wrong in the same way, then what anchors us to the truth? Imagine sitting in a crowded room where each person carries the same photograph in their pocket. They pull it out and it's identical. But then, one day, the photo changes, subtly, undeniably. Half the room swears it was always that way. The other half looks at you with wide eyes, whispering, no, it wasn't. You're left grasping at air, the ground beneath you no longer solid, your mind no longer trustworthy. The weight of shared illusions is heavy because it destabilizes not only personal memory, but the collective fabric of what we agree to be true. History itself begins to wobble. If an entire population can remember Nelson Mandela's death in prison decades before he actually passed away, then what else is written in pencil instead of ink? What else can be erased and redrawn without our consent? And here lies the most chilling thought. Maybe the Mandela effect isn't just shared misremembering. Maybe it's shared remembering of a version of reality we no longer inhabit. Maybe the reason the illusion feels so heavy, so thick, is because our souls recognize the truth even when the world denies it. When illusions are private, they fade. When they are shared, they calcify into legend. And legends, over time, feel like truth. The Mandela effect shows us how fragile the line is between illusion and memory, and how easily we might already be living inside a history that isn't ours. What does it mean when agreement itself becomes unreliable? In most of life, consensus is our compass. If enough people say the sky is blue, you begin to believe in blueness. If enough people confirm a date, a word, a memory, you trust it. You lean on the crowd when your own memory falters. But what happens when the crowd falters with you? When consensus itself begins to look like a mirage, drifting over desert sands? The Mandela effect is not frightening because it reveals flaws in your memory. It is frightening because it reveals flaws in our memory. Suddenly, the collective mind, the very thing we rely on to ground our individual experiences, feels haunted. Consensus becomes less of a compass and more of a ghost, whispering truths that dissolve as soon as you reach out to touch them. Think of the famous examples. Luke, I am your father. You can still hear the line, can't you? A voice echoing through cinema, a cultural touchstone repeated, parodied, etched into the language of film. Yet the line never existed. The script reads differently. The actor's voice says otherwise. But millions across decades remember it wrong together. A single mishearing would be forgivable. But this scale, this mass alignment of error, shatters the illusion of stability. Consensus, once our anchor, becomes unmoored. And what about children's stories, the books and films of our earliest years? We cling to them as safe havens of certainty, untouchable relics of childhood. Yet here too, the Mandela effect seeps in. Was it Berenstain or Berenstain Bears? One letter, that's all. But that one letter fractures trust. People remember their parents pronouncing it differently, teachers writing it differently, entire libraries cataloguing it differently. How can such a minor change cause such a major rupture? Because it forces us to confront the idea that the universe itself is editable, as though someone somewhere pressed backspace on reality. Consensus, once seen as a safeguard, becomes suspect. If we cannot rely on shared memory, then what is left? Perhaps memory itself is not a record but a vote, and the version with the most believers wins, for a time, until the tide shifts, until another consensus ghost takes its place. Now pause and imagine this: reality as a book whose sentences are rewritten in real time, not by one hand, but by millions of readers. You believe the story because everyone around you is nodding in agreement. Yet when you return to the same page years later, the ink has changed. You turn to your neighbor, wasn't it different before? And they nod back, wide-eyed, confirming the ghost you feel but cannot prove. This is why the Mandela effect unsettles us so deeply. It is not about logos, lines, or letters. It is about the erosion of trust in the collective. If we cannot rely on each other to hold steady the map of what has happened, then perhaps the map itself is shifting beneath us. Perhaps consensus is not a compass pointing to truth, but a phantom pointing to nothing at all. And once you feel that chill, once you see consensus as a ghost, you begin to wonder what else in our shared reality has already changed without us noticing. Imagine reality as a great woven cloth, threads of memory interlacing, binding us to one another in shared understanding. Every thread represents a story, a recollection, a small agreement that this happened, that it was so, that it belonged to all of us. The Mandela effect is like watching that fabric slowly fray, threads loosening and slipping away, leaving gaps where once there was certainty. When a single person misremembers, the fabric holds. The community fills the gap, stitching the memory back into place. But when millions misremember together, in the same way at the same time, the fabric begins to unravel. It is no longer one fragile thread. It is a fault line running through the entire tapestry. Suddenly the cloth no longer feels secure. and you begin to wonder if it was ever tightly woven at all. Take, for example, the memory of a Monopoly board game. Do you recall the man with the monocle, the dapper little capitalist smiling at you from the box? Many swear he had one. They can picture it perfectly, even swear they once noticed the glint of it in the light. But he never wore one. Check the archives, the old boxes, the artwork. It isn't there. And yet, the memory lingers, vivid and stubborn, not just in one mind, but across countless households. How can absence feel so present? How can something that never existed be so insistently remembered? Here, the Mandela Effect forces us to see memory not as an archive, but as a performance. Each time we recall, we are not dusting off an old book. We are rewriting it, word by word, image by image. And when enough people rehearse the same false performance, it becomes indistinguishable from truth. Agreement was once our safety net, our assurance of stability. But if agreement itself can be manipulated by error, by culture, by something deeper, then the fabric of shared reality is fragile indeed. It is like watching a familiar building shift in the dark. The windows you swore faced west now seem to face east. The staircase turns left instead of right. You ask your friends, and they too swear it was different. Yet the building stands unmoved, immutable in the daylight. You are left asking, was it the building that changed, or us? Was the weave of reality itself altered, or did we all dream the same false dream? The unraveling is slow, subtle, and invisible until it is undeniable. A letter here, a logo there, a line of dialogue that never was. All small tears. But together, they reveal the truth we are afraid to admit. That what we call reality is only as strong as the threads of memory and agreement that hold it together. And those threads, it seems, are weaker than we believed. So when the fabric begins to fray, we are left with a haunting question. Are we watching reality itself unravel? Or are we finally seeing the flaws that were always there, hidden in the weave? There is a strange kind of beauty in the thought that perhaps our memories are not failures at all, but echoes, whispers of other versions of reality brushing against our own. The Mandela Effect often feels like this, a sound carried across a canyon, distorted yet familiar, as though we are overhearing a truth that belongs to another world, another time, another version of ourselves. Let's pause and imagine the nature of an echo. It is not the original voice, yet it carries its essence. It travels, shifts, stretches, becomes softer, but still recognizable. What if our false memories, the ones we all seem to share, are not false at all, but echoes of events that happened elsewhere, to us, but not to this us? Think about how it feels when you remember something with absolute certainty, only to be proven wrong. There is a sting, yes, but also an uncanny persistence, a refusal of the mind to surrender. Why? Because somewhere deep inside, your being insists on the reality of that memory. It was this way, your mind cries, even as the world shows you otherwise. Perhaps this stubbornness is not delusion, but resonance. A tuning fork struck in one reality continues to vibrate in another, and we, caught between vibrations, mistake the overlap for error. The examples we often laugh about, logos shifting, lines in films bending, names changing, may be the surface ripples of something much larger. They are the places where timelines brush against each other like passing ships, leaving faint wakes behind. A letter altered, a phrase inverted, a color deepened. It is as if two versions of the same story momentarily collide, and our minds catch the trace of both. Most people will dismiss this as faulty memory. But for those who listen closely, who lean into the echo, it feels like confirmation that reality is not a single line, but a chorus of possibilities. Picture this. Countless realities stacked like transparent glass sheets, each slightly different, each reflecting a different version of events. Most of the time they align perfectly, so we mistake them for one. But every so often, they slip, just slightly, just enough to let the light bend differently through the layers. In that slippage, we glimpse another truth, another spelling, another ending. And our memory, fragile yet profound, captures both. That capture, that overlap, is the Mandela Effect. Consider Nelson Mandela himself, the origin of the name. Millions claim to remember his death in prison in the 1980s, so vividly that they recalled news coverage, public mourning, even speeches. Yet in this reality, he lived decades longer. How could such a vivid, widespread memory exist? If it were a single hallucination, we could dismiss it. But collective echoes are harder to explain. Unless, of course, in another reality, he did die in that cell. and the memory of that timeline lingers within us like an unfinished dream. The more we explore these collective misremembrances, the more they feel like coordinates, markers of where timelines intersect, where echoes slip through. They may not prove parallel universes, but they force us to ask, is memory a private process? Or is it the antenna by which we receive faint transmissions from other versions of ourselves? There is a loneliness in this thought, but also a comfort. A loneliness because it suggests we are fractured, scattered across realities, never whole in one. A comfort because it suggests we are never entirely bound to one fate, one story, one timeline. The Mandela Effect becomes less of a glitch and more of a message. We are plural beings, straddling plural truths. So next time you feel the ache of a memory that reality denies, do not dismiss it so quickly. Hold it, turn it over, listen for the echo within it, because maybe, just maybe, it is not wrong. Maybe it is simply the voice of another life, another path, another you, calling across the canyon. And perhaps the greatest illusion of all is believing that there was ever only one timeline to begin with. Imagine a city built of glass, floor upon floor, street upon street, each layer a slightly altered echo of the one beneath. Walk its avenues, and you will see familiar storefronts shifted by inches, signboards reading names that almost match, windows opening onto rooms that feel like home, but contain different furniture. From above, the tiers align. From below, they diverge. This is the image that keeps returning when we try to feel what layered timelines might be like. Translucent cities stacked on one another, each inhabited by a version of us that made different small choices. The Mandela Effect moves through these cities like a light that refracts. A logo misplaced on one floor becomes a rumor on the next. A film line misremembered on one avenue becomes gospel on the floor above. The changes are rarely dramatic, no sudden mountains where oceans once were, but they ripple through the mundane. A name spelled differently, a mascot with a different hat, a map with a country nudged a few degrees. These are the small deviations that reveal the larger architecture, worlds that are nearly identical and yet not. What does it feel like to live between these panes? For many, it is an odd kind of grief, an ache for coherence. We rely on sameness to make meaning, to thread our lives into stories with beginnings, middles, and ends. When sameness fractures into layers, the narrative loosens. We find ourselves pausing in supermarkets, in movie theaters, at family tables and asking, which floor did I live on before? The question tastes like salt. It is longing slid into curiosity. Science looks at this and offers gentle explanations. Memory as reconstruction, suggestion as a sculptor of recollection, cultural repetition laying new mortar over old bricks. Psychology is patient and precise. Neurons misfire, stories echo, errors become habit. These answers sit well in daylight, tidy and plausible. Yet the translucent city image refuses to dissolve in daylight alone. It lingers at the edges, because the Mandela Effect is not merely a single misremembered thing. It is a pattern, many small, consistent differences that collect like rain on a rooftop, until the drip becomes a river. Philosophy leans in then, soft-voiced and dangerous, and asks us to consider that our common-sense notion of one linear world might be the simplest story we tell ourselves to sleep. What if reality is a palimpsest? Layers written over layers, each new narrative faintly visible beneath the current script. We read the topmost lines and believed them whole, not noticing the ghosted sentences beneath that sometimes press through like underink. The Mandela Effect may be those ghost sentences insisting on being read, and there is a tenderness here too. Layered cities are not only places of loss, they are places of possibility. If multiple versions of a life coexist, if a little shift could make a different childhood, a different conversation, a different person, then our sense of regret or wonder acquires new dimensions. The memory that insists on being otherwise might not be a theft of truth, but a memory of a life that was almost ours, a life that still exists on another floor, twinned and real in its own ways. To hold that thought is to expand compassion for the selves we were, for the choices we did not make, for the roads we only imagined walking. The Mandela Effect is the ache of recognition when you glimpse another floor through a window and find, impossibly, that the room you once loved there still holds a lamp that you tossed in this life. It is the soft cruelty of familiarity with variation. It teaches us humility, about the limits of what we can prove, and about the generosity of what we can imagine. So we walk through these translucent cities and learn small practices. To listen longer when someone says, "I remember it that way," to keep our certainties soft, to honor memory as testimony, even when it contradicts the records. Whether the layered world image is literal truth or a poetic map for the mind, it changes how we relate to each other. It invites us to treat disagreement not as evidence of madness, but as evidence of plurality, to see a neighbor's certainty as a window into another flaw rather than a denial of our own. When you next notice a tiny mismatch, an extra letter, a missing accent, allow yourself that pause. Look around the street. Imagine the city above, the city below. Let the thought sit like a stone in your palm, heavy enough to anchor you, small enough to hold. There, between floors, the Mandela Effect breathes, quiet, patient, an architecture of small differences that might one day rearrange the map of everything we think we know. And so, here we are, standing at the edge of something we cannot quite name. The Mandela Effect, playful to some, terrifying to others, remains both riddle and mirror. It teases us with small shifts, a letter here, a phrase there, a memory tugging against the grain of official truth. But beneath those shifts lies the deeper unease. Not that we are wrong, but that reality itself may be slippery. We began this journey with fragments of memory, stories half forgotten, childhood recollections that never seem to match the world we now face. As we pulled on those threads, the tapestry itself trembled. Was it simply our minds betraying us, fragile and malleable, rewriting their own history as they always do? Or were we brushing against something more, a layered existence, echoes from other timelines, ghost sentences pressing through the page of our reality? The truth may never sit neatly in our hands. Perhaps it was never meant to. Perhaps the Mandela Effect exists to remind us of humility, that memory is not a fortress but a garden, growing wild, shaped by time, suggestion, and the mysterious soil of consciousness itself. Or perhaps it is an invitation, an opening in the wall of certainty, asking us to imagine that the universe is far more fluid, more strange, more multiple than we dare to admit. Either way, the effect lingers. It whispers in quiet corners, in the pause before you finish a familiar line of dialogue, in the way a word looks suddenly foreign on the page, in the shared laughter of friends arguing over how something used to be. It turns the ordinary into portals, asking us to look twice, to listen more carefully, to question what we thought unshakable. And maybe that's the gift hidden in the confusion. The Mandela Effect makes us pay attention. It pulls us from autopilot, jolts us into wonder, forces us to admit how little we truly know. And in that space of not knowing, something profound awakens. A curiosity, a softness, a willingness to believe that mystery still walks beside us in the modern world, disguised as misspelled words and altered lines. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the uncertainty settle like fog around you. Do not fear the gaps in memory, the cracks in consensus, the echoes from elsewhere. Instead, hold them gently, as one might hold a seashell to the ear, listening to the ocean that cannot be seen. Let them remind you that reality is not a locked room, but a wide, shifting horizon. And if tomorrow you wake and the world feels a little different, if the map tilts, if the names blur, if the past you remember doesn't match the past you were told, do not panic. Smile, just a little, for you have already walked through the translucent cities. You have already heard the echoes. You know now that the fabric of reality is not fixed but alive, rippling with possibility. This is the strange, quiet beauty of the Mandela Effect. Not that it proves or disproves, but that it asks us to live with wonder, to stand in the in-between, to remember that even in a world of records and archives and certainty, mystery has not abandoned us. It still waits in the corners of memory, in the shared illusions of crowds, in the subtle shifts of logos and names. So rest now, traveler. Let your thoughts drift, not as rigid truths, but as waves moving through layered oceans. And when you close your eyes tonight, imagine yourself stepping across timelines, carrying fragments of other lives within you. For in the end, perhaps we are not defined by what we remember, but by the courage to wonder why we remember it differently at all. Sleep well, and may your dreams be wide enough to hold more than one reality.